I'm the Director of Enterprise Data Standards and Governance at the Ministry of Public and Business Service Delivery and Procurement. And effectively, that's a lot of words to say that what we're looking at is to try to bring more enterprise strategic direction and governance to how the government of Ontario uses its data assets, how we do it in a private and secure way, but also how do we strike the balance between that and innovation and better user data for decision making, for AI, for all the things in between that are requiring us to do the best that we can with that government asset to meet the needs of our people, our businesses, and our economic future. It's a great question because it actually exposes the breadth of the challenge that we have in the governance space. So if you think about accuracy, this is really just talking about how do we build standards, how do we apply quality standards, how do we oversee them, how do we measure that consistently across. And so that requires a whole system of thinking around governance. If you think about the trustworthiness part, that requires interacting with our public and being clear with them about how we're using data, what is our consent policy, how do we engage with the public potentially when we're thinking about broader uses of data, whether it be AI, whether it be data and analytics, predictions as we think about how to better deliver services. So all of these different components, and innovation it goes back to the AI conversation. So how do we build the skills and build on the infrastructure that we already have as we're thinking about machine learning and using data to predict trends, to better understand how citizens interact with our services, how the people of Ontario interact with our services, how we can better use that data for businesses. How do we push in those spaces? So it's actually about governance, it's about building our skills, it's about better use of that data, it's about those feedback loops with the public to maintain that trust. One is the actual way that typically, and that's not just a government problem, but one that we see across large organizations, is that we typically don't have our organizational model where we have all the responsibilities of data in one place. So what I mean by that is, we have areas that might be responsible for operations, dedicated areas for finance, for service delivery, but you typically don't have areas of responsibility of data all in one space. It's a diffuse responsibility that's built into where we deliver services, where we design programs. And so the people responsible for doing data-related activities, setting the standards and governance, the people responsible for the infrastructure that houses the data, the people responsible for public reporting and the KPIs, for example, the people responsible for making decisions around investments and funding around skills, these are all in different components of government. So that's one of our challenges. How do we bring together all the responsible people in government so that we can make decisions that are taking more strategic approaches to the better use of that data, the governance of that data, building out the skills and literacy that we need for that. And so one of the things that we're doing now is thinking about those ideas from an enterprise view, not just ministry by ministry, not just program by program, but how do we take that cross-enterprise strategic view so that we're looking at data as a strategic asset for all of government, not just for any one ministry or program. I think when we think about the balance, I think that's the crux of the question. So much of our thinking around how we use data is around privacy, it's around security, it's around making sure that people are aware of, particularly when it comes to personal information, about how their information is being used, what they're consenting to, that we're actually collecting and using that data consistent for the reasons that we indicated that it would be used. And so a lot of our thinking of what we can and can't do is based on those sorts of parameters and how legislation is structured. And legislation is quite clear that if we're collecting data for service delivery, we can only use it for service delivery, and often not for what we call secondary purposes, which is research and analytics, and those innovation spaces like AI and machine learning. They require different parameters around that use of data. So it's really trying to rethink what we can do in the legislative construct in the here and now so that we can better think about data, not just through the lens of privacy, but through utility. How do we need to push the agenda? How do we need to think differently so that we can use data, not just for the purposes in which it was collected, but changing the way that we maybe think about our legislative instruments and our consent policies to better allow for that sharing and use across government. Some of it is, like I said, it's working within the confines of a legislation. So that means understanding exactly what legislation and policies and our service standards might say, and our consent policies and everything in between. And so, it takes a village in that space. It requires working with our program areas, understanding what concerns or issues we might be hearing from public as they think about how their data is being used, how we think about working with the Information Privacy Commissioner, our legal services, and really having a good sort of set of understanding of what our guardrails are and how we can most effectively work within them to achieve that sort of best optimization use of data. So that's really what we're after. And so a lot of that requires having to do the hard work of building out data sharing agreements, engaging with the right people, and setting up those conditions for success. But there are cases where we can think beyond and push the agenda. So for example, in recent years, Ontario has started thinking about employment services, delivering that in a more integrated way, not just through one ministry, but multiple ministries. So you can come through social services or you can come through the training and skills door. We look at it as one program, irrespective of what door you came from. So that required us to think about data sharing in a different way because we were actually housing one program and housing the data in that one program across two different ministries. And so it requires us rethinking our legislation and making sure the right privacy and security guardrails are in place, but also that we have the flexibility so that we can do what we need to do to improve citizen experience, because when we're looking at it from a public standpoint, any door that we come in should be the right door. It shouldn't matter if we came in through that ministry door or another ministry door. And so that's where we can push the agenda as well, finding those opportunities for integrated service delivery and then rethinking what our data governance and privacy should be around that. So one is around that concept of data utility. So much of our thinking, our forward thinking, our strategy has really been predicated on the idea of protecting data, making sure that our citizens, the people of Ontario are aware of how it's being used, and that continues to be paramount. But I think it's going back to thinking about what is the right balance of that. Privacy should sit on one side, but we also need to think about maximizing utility and finding the right balance between the two. And one of the things that means for us, we have to start rethinking how we collect data. So it is done through that legislative frame, and it's often done by system, by program, by ministry. When you think about government data, there's no such thing as one unified idea of government data. It is really just collected. In Ontario, for example, there's about 1,700 systems that collect various data in various ways about people, about our national resources, about businesses, about everything in between. And so we need to, when we think about policy questions or service design questions or innovation questions, we don't think of them in those siloed ways. We're actually thinking about broader issues around whether it be mental health and addictions, or whether it be healthcare delivery or digital services, or optimizing the way we deliver services. We're thinking about permitting and licensing now. And so it requires bringing our data together and actually restructuring and creating data domains instead of looking at our data through these silos. And I think the next sort of big evolution or opportunity for us will be starting to reimagine and start managing our data in this domain-based model and starting to integrate against these domains versus these programmatic, systematic silos.